good afternoon, everyone, and thank you so much for joining us this afternoon. I'm Victoria Bright, Director of Experiences at Tech Alliance of Southwestern Ontario, a place for dreamers, innovators, and world-changing ideas. In collaboration with partners and participants like all of you, Tech Alliance is really committed to inspire innovation by providing advisory services, education, our accelerator program, and access to capital for companies who launch, scale, and compete globally. So through our experiences like today, we're bringing together industry experts and thought leaders and change makers to provide you insight and guidance for your business. And so just before we get started, I just want to share a few key points. You'll notice that everyone is muted. If you have any questions, please take your mouse and scroll down to the bottom of the page, and you will see the Q&A feature at the bottom of your screen. So throughout the presentation, please feel free to put in your questions. And then after the presentation, we'll have some Q&A at the end. And I just want to mention as well that we're hosting a virtual office hours with BDO for one-on-one consultations tomorrow from 1 to 4 p.m. So immediately following this webcast, you're going to receive a link to the session. So if you would like to sign up and have more of a one-on-one consultation, you can. And this webinar will be recorded and made available as well. So the pandemic has impacted everyone, but during these times, scientific research and innovation are really the catalyst to recovery. So today we'll review what government funding opportunities are available for scientific research and experimental development, otherwise known as SRED, and how you can maximize the funding relief with COVID-19 program changes while leveraging other resources as well. So we're pleased to host the SRED funding for R&D initiatives in partnership with BDO Canada LLP. So now I'm very pleased to introduce our friends at BDO, Jennifer Running and Andrew Moss. Jennifer is a chartered professional accountant and a senior tax manager at BDO Canada with almost 20 years experience in SRED and other government incentive programs. And as a tax specialist, she's an expert in navigating and resolving tax disputes and representing clients in audits, appeals, and assists legal counsel in preparing tax court documents within the tech sector involving manufacturing, IT, human health sciences for small and large international companies. And Andrew is a chartered professional accountant and manager in BDO's London office. And with over 15 years of experience in accounting, taxation and audit, operational analysis and financial management, he has provided professional advice to businesses in various industrial sectors, including technology, manufacturing, service, and retail. So welcome to both of you. So let's get started, and over to you, Andrew. Welcome.
Thanks very much, Victoria, and thanks for the opportunity to for BDO to collaborate on this topic with Tech Alliance. It's a good opportunity, and I hope the attendees find the information useful. As Victoria said, we've got the opportunity to have an open hours session with BDO, but if the timing doesn't quite work for you, then please get in touch through Victoria or contact or reach out to me, and we can find a time that suits you. So the intention of today's session is to cover the various funding opportunities for tech companies in going through R&D projects. We specifically, Jennifer, my colleague, is going to focus on SRED and the government funding options. Just before we dive into the SRED piece, given the number of programs that are out there for in response to COVID-19 and the government response, I just wanted to give a very quick overview, just from an awareness perspective, on the various programs that are out there. I know there's been a lot of content put out there, and Tech Alliance has done a number of sessions on a number of the programs, but I just from an awareness perspective, give a high level overview before we kind of dive into the SRED piece. Victoria's covered our introductions. So the various programs that are out there, a number of them are driven at companies, particularly to maintain employment. And originally we saw the 10% temporary wage subsidy was put out there, and then that was extended with the 75% wage subsidy. certain restrictions apply to that wage subsidy, principally around a reduction in revenue over specific periods. But if one piece I would follow up on that, it's quite a complex area, and if you believe your company may meet the criteria and are looking to make an application for either the wage subsidy or the temporary wage subsidy, please reach out. BDO have got a specific team who are supporting clients going through that application, as figuring out some of the rules and the restrictions on eligibility are quite complex. One of the challenges startup organisations have had with the wage subsidy, the 75% wage subsidy, is particularly around the revenue eligibility. And so for growing companies, there are certain other programs available. We've noted through IAP there. In terms of additional additional options, there's the work sharing program that offers EI support, and also to bring capital to the organisations. There's the availability of additional credit through the emergency business account and the BCAP program. Again, if there are the specific eligibility criteria, but if you feel that those options are applicable to the company, I'd suggest reaching out to the financial institution and working through those options. One of the more recent programs that has been released is the CCRA, which is additional assistance to meet rental payments for commercial premises. I've got a slide in a moment just to cover a few more details on that one, just because it's a more recent program. The other ones noted here, Jennifer's going to go into a little more detail on a lot more detail on the SRED program, and we just mentioned from a personal perspective, there's the additional support around EI and the SRED program. If you did want more detail about the government's response to COVID, there's a link on our to our website, which has got additional materials. And I would say that the slides that we're going through today, at the end of the slides, there's some more detail on these programs, and we will be forwarding these slides out to attendees at the end of the presentation. So as I said, I'm just going to just give a little bit more detail on the rental program, just because that's a more recent one. In effect, to qualify, there needs to be an agreement in place between the landlord and the tenant. The assistance is available through April, May and June. The deadline for applications isn't until 31st of August. Effectively, what the program does is the government gives out a forgivable loan for 50% of the rent in those periods, and then the landlord has to forgive at least 25% of the rental amount. So the tenants generally will end up with a 25% payment for those periods. So what I'm going to do now, I'm going to hand over to Jennifer, who's going to take you through the rest of the slides. Jennifer, over to you.
Thank you, Andrew. Can everyone hear me okay? Andrew, can you hear me?
Yep. Coming through well.
Thank you, everyone. Thank you for joining us today. My name is Jennifer Running, and I'm a CPA tax specialist in our government incentives group at BDO, as I've been introduced. This is my first webinar, so bear with me. I have a lot of slides today, and I'm used to being very interactive with my audience, so I might gloss over some information today, or I might get into a little more details in some areas, but please feel free to ask questions at the end, anything that is specifically related to your situation that you want more information on that I might just kind of skimmed by, or like Victoria said, please feel free to make appointment with me tomorrow to go through maybe your specific SRED application or any questions you might have in person. That would be great. So today specifically, I'm going to talk about the SR&ED program. I want to talk about what's involved in identifying an eligible project. I want to talk about some of the types of documentation that we need to support your claim from both a technical and financial standpoint. I'm going to go through some of the eligible costs that can be claimed that you can earn the investment tax credits on. And then I'm going to run through an example of actually the return of investment on each of the expenditures and how much investment tax credits you will get back, as well as then talk about some of the direct funding impacts when you receive direct funding, whether it be through some of these COVID programs or through other incentive programs, and how they affect SRED and how you can use them to fund your claim. So most of you probably know that the SRED program is the Scientific Research and Experimental Development Program. It is the single largest tax credit program R&D initiative in Canada. Over 20,000 claimants, taxpayers access it annually, and there's $3.5 billion put out through this program. It's administered through the Canada Revenue Agency, the federal program, and each province has their own incentive program to top it up. Any company in Canada any business can apply, no matter what the size or how you're organized or whatever industry. Everyone's available to apply to it. There's no yearly maximum on how much you can claim within the program. However, based on whether or not you're a CCPC, foreign owned, private company, there's different limitations on the ITCs that can be earned and whether or not it's a tax credit to your company that can be applied against taxes payable, or whether or not you can get the enhanced rate and get a refund in cash back to your company. So typically as part of my presentation, I really like to talk about tax credit programs such as SRED versus grants and how they differ and how you can actually use them together to fund your R&D initiatives. So companies can use them to play off each other to get upfront funding through the grant program, and then claim on the back end on the tax credit side to get as much money through all initiatives into their corporations to fund this development. Today, though, however, I'm not going to talk so much about the grants, because right now what we're seeing is that the federal government and the provincial and municipalities have taken all their grant programs and they've really redirected everything towards COVID initiatives. So the money there is being spent in that aspect, and they're not really accepting any applications from some of the typical programs. So your IRAPs, your NGENs, those things might sound familiar to some people. MyTax, they all have COVID-related aspects to them right now, and that's where they're redirecting the funds. So for a research and development project that's typically ongoing, we can't access it quite at the moment, but they will open that back up, and I will provide some more information on where you can see that and website links at the end of this presentation. On the tax credit side, though, the SR&ED program, because it's administered through the CRA, it's administered through the Income Tax Act, it is not going anywhere. If you are eligible and you meet the requirements that we're going to go through today, that funding is still available to you. Unlike grants, though, which you get the money up front, tax credits come after the fact, after you have the spending. So you apply for the program annually at the end of your fiscal taxation year, and then you receive the money after the fact. It can generate you a cash refund out to you, or if you're in a tax payable position, the credit can offset that and help with your cash flows on an installment basis. So with respect to applying for the SRED program, in order to get the best return on your dollars, in order to help us assess what's eligible, one of the biggest questions I have that I see claimants ask me is what is eligible? How do I claim? And this is really where I want to talk about this. Is when you first meet with us, this is the things that we talk about. SRED is actually typically found as part of a business project. So when we first meet for the first time, companies will bring me information on certain development initiatives, commercial product developments, prototypes that they're creating. And that's where the conversation begins. But what we look for for SR&ED is that the SRED is actually technology-based, and SRED projects actually exist within the business project, and actually more than one can exist within a business project. You could have multiple technologies that you're developing and advancing in order to advance your product, your process, or your service. Likewise, technology, you might be advancing a similar technology across various products or processes, various initiatives. You're using the same technology, but you're using it in various business or commercial applications or customer-based things. And that's how we're going to look at that and explain that when we go through this. So a business's R&D project is not necessarily the same as the SR&ED project. The SR&ED project is typically, like I said, it's a subset of a project, and it must fit into a field of science. So when we talk about the SR&ED program and we talk about what we're going to claim, we look specifically at what fields of science within or technologies within your development are you advancing. We look at an entire business project. It's important for us and for CRA to understand the entire process and how it evolves, the development process involves. The law requires that you conduct a systematic investigation or search in investigating your problem and your R&D, but they're not going to compensate you or reimburse you on all those costs that go into the development. CRA requires that we do your due diligence, and they want to see that. That's that requirements gathering section that you see stroked out there. It's a requirement that we do our due diligence and that we look into what's available knowledge base out in the industry and to the companies, but then what are they building on from there in order to create their advancement and to create their R&D and advance their technology base. The SRED program is actually there to compensate, let's explain it, that they compensate the time it's taking you to take the risk. So when you go out there and you're doing your due diligence and you initiate an R&D project or a business project, you have lots of avenues available to you. And when you choose to overcome that risk, when you evaluate all the options out there and you say, you know what, those could work and may not work, or I could cobble that together, but you choose to take that risk and there's unknowns, technological unknowns resulting with that, that's kind of when you know you have the SR&ED starting point. And that's really what this program is there for CRA, to say, you take that risk and know that we're going to be there to support you in that development and that testing to overcome some of those uncertainties. So I like this slide a lot because what it does is that it shows when we're looking at SR&ED, what it is and where it lies. Usually in development, in any company that you're in, manufacturing, IT, health sciences, whatever the case may be, you're usually going through a certain phase, and this slide compensates that. It goes through the market research, the due diligence. If you're in the health sciences, might go through the lit searches, what's existing out there. You're applying your internal and external know-how, and then you get to that base and you determine what that technological challenges are. When you meet with us, or when you yourself are trying to evaluate if you have an SR&ED project, I suggest using a slide such as this method to say, have I gone through those stages and can I communicate that? One of the biggest challenges I find sometimes with especially first-time claimants or people new to the program is that they say they're doing R&D, and why isn't all of it eligible? Or what's the difference between SR&ED and R&D? And this is a good visualization of that difference. And what we do is we really try to focus in on that. CRA requires that all of these stages, I say they require that the first stages go through. Not everybody gets to optimization, fine-tuning, the commercialization aspect of it. Sometimes there's failures along the way. SRED doesn't care if you fail or you succeed, if you get to a commercial product or you get to that optimization stage or not. What they care about is, what SRED's looking for is, are you trying to overcome a technological challenge, and what advancement are you trying to seek? What is it that you're trying to understand? And success or failure is actually measured in knowledge and new knowledge, what to do next or what not to do the next time. And that's what we look at. So when we're talking to you, you'll see us go through this process, and people sometimes ask me, why are we talking about all these things? That's not the SRED, that's not the R&D. But that understanding is really important to show not only to us, because these stages are, CRA wants to know what you've included in SRED, but they also want to know what you're not including in SR&ED, and they want to see this process going through. So this slide is kind of like a reiteration of that. Again, another visual to say how SRED is project focused inside a product. So you have any type of software. Someone used the accounting software in this one, but you could have accounting software. We're not really concerned about the capabilities and the innovation of the software itself. What we're looking at is the underlying technology, and is there advancements in it and how it comes together and the challenges within that. So when we get to that point, what we have to do to make an SR&ED claim, when we ascertain whether or not you're eligible or not, we have to file what's called the T661. And we take all this information and we have to put it into these types of questions. And so this is the stuff that we will talk to you about specifically, and to reorganize your R&D project and your business project into these categories: the technological uncertainty, the technological content, and the technological advancements. And the reason that the T661 is important, because it's the tax form that goes into CRA. So for you guys, the claimant, that's the form that we have to take your huge project into and condense it into these eligible activities in order for you guys to get the investment tax credit. For us to prepare, or the person who's working on the T661 on your behalf, we have to focus on making sure that it shows that your project, the SR&ED project, meets those compliance and that eligibility. And CRA uses as a risk tool in order to make sure that they look at it from a science standpoint, but it also conveys cost and all the aspects that they're looking for to see whether or not that you're eligible in this program. And it's really the main tool and most important tool, and the difference between what a good SRED project or successful SRED project is versus an unsuccessful is the ability to weed out the business aspect of it, weed out some of those ineligible components that I showed you in that graph versus the eligible, and focus that and condense it. We have word restrictions on these. We have 750 words to tell CRA what you've done in a year and communicate that. And then that becomes a challenge. And using these tools is a way that we work with you guys to ensure that we're all on the same page on how the SR&ED program flows through your business or your R&D aspects. Documentation and evidence of your claim is a requirement by the CRA. This is something that's on the T661 as well. This is an example of, or a list of documents that CRA provides as an example of things that you should be keeping in order to evidence that both your technical aspects of your claim exist, as well as then the financial side of your claim. This is something as first-time claimants, CRA becomes is a little bit more, I wouldn't say lenient on. Not all of these are required by any means. The boxes are around them to suggest, for example, resources of records allocated to the project versus timesheets. CRA would love to see timesheets, right? That's what they'd like to see everyone to move through to see that what is it that you're doing that relates to the SR&ED, and is it eligible work? But first-time claimants might have more records of resources allocated to the project, and that can take many forms, and those are things that we work with you to help you improve your documentation, because evidence needs to improve throughout your time within the SRED program, and there's ways that we work with you to help with that. So from a costing standpoint, we've talked, and again, I apologize I'm going so quickly, but from the technical aspect, we've gone through the project and how it's eligible from an SR&ED standpoint. But at the end of the day, when you have an eligible project from a technology side, then we need to make sure that there's eligible costs. Because if there's no eligible cost to be claimed, then you can have, I would say you can have the best science in the world, but if you don't have the costs accounted for in the correct way, there's nothing there to claim, and there's no dollars to get back from this program. We filed SRED claims at T661 form, as I said, with your tax return at the end of the fiscal year. Therefore, you must have, in order to make a SRED claim, your tax returns up to date. We'll need a financial statement, typically a trial balance. T4s, as I will talk about, one of the biggest components of a SRED claim and eligible expenditure is labor, and that can happen through either T4'd labor or subcontractor agreements. You can have subcontractor labor if it's Canadian-based, but those are types of things that will be required. Other things, like I talked about, CRA would love timesheets or activity tracking, resource planning. There can be various types of development and project tracking, CAD, source code, all these different things, which will prove that the work was performed during the year and the type of work performed. Records of any government assistance. This is that direct funding that I talked about earlier. Anything else that's supporting your claim, or any other agencies that are supporting your claim, that's really, really important. They need to be offset, potentially, depending on the agreement, against SRED, and I'll show later how that actually affects the calculation. One thing I do like to mention, especially because this is a TLS type call, which is a technology in the life sciences, is contractual agreements in collaborative research. So especially in the life sciences, we see a lot of collaborative research being done between various organizations, nonprofits, research organizations, universities, as well as corporations, and they're joining together to solve or advance science. That collaborative research agreement and how that exists is really, really important, because in those cases, science typically is amazing, right? You definitely, CRA doesn't have an issue identifying whether or not there's an advancement in science there. But who owns the science and how the work's performed, and who incurs the cost and what is eligible, that actually becomes very important in those types of claims. And then the contractual agreements, the invoices, the subcontractor agreements, IP agreements become very important. So for any of you out there who are working with other organizations and doing joint projects, that information is key to put forth to us. As I said earlier, all your corporate tax filings must be up to date. If you do make a claim and you don't have your HST, your payroll remittances, anything up to date, any refunds you'll be owing will be offset against that. And we have 18 months from year end to make SR&ED claims. So if you have a tax return, just as an example, if you have a December 31st, 2018 tax return, you would have 18 months from year end to file, which, theoretically you would have until this June 2020 to make that SR&ED claim. So you can go back that far in making an SR&ED claim. So the costs that we'll claim in SRED are salaries and wages for directly engaged personnel, and I'll talk about what that is. Materials, consumed or transformed. These are things that are consumed in SR&ED, typically raw materials, prototypes that are scrapped. Canadian contractor costs, anything that is not Canadian is ineligible. Overhead and other expenditures, they are eligible costs in what we call the traditional method, and I'll give an example of what that means. CRA allows you to claim overhead in two different ways. They'll give you 55% of your labor base. If you want to use the proxy claim, it's the easy claim. It's what 95% of claimants use, except for in health sciences. Typically, I see more traditional costs because the overhead and the indirect costs to run trials and to run that type of research are typically more than sometimes what the direct costs are. And costs must be paid within 180 days of year end in order to be claimable. If they're not paid within 180 days of year end, they're just deferred, and then you receive the ITC in a different year. Again, this is just about labor, and I'm going to just skim through this a little bit as I want to get to the example, and I don't want to run out of time so I can get all the information to you guys. But basically, labor is directly engaged time. There's various methods, even if you don't have timesheets, that we can help you with first-time claimants or new to the program relatively, to help put that together. So don't be deterred by the fact that you might not have all the documentation that you think you may have in order to make a claim. We'll work with you on that, or we'll show you, or there's typically more documentation than you think, and there's other ways to gather that. In a claim, typically for labor, This just kind of shows where we typically find the bulk of labor: experimentation, analysis, technical oversight, documentation, people doing the experimentation. That's kind of the easy stuff. The support work is where we find the bulk of labor costs that people tend to miss, and that's where the bulk of your costs come. Support work is the engineering, design, data collection, testing. Testing is something easy. They say if you're doing testing, you know, most people can think that's what's eligible. Data collection, for example, it's an odd one. CRA says routine data collection is ineligible, but data collection that supports a SRED claim can be support work and that you can claim it. So that's the type of things that we really work with, and we help find, when you think back to that slide I showed earlier, the different stages of how a project evolves, how we look at where some of these activities match in some of those various stages to determine whether or not we can claim them. Contracts, just a brief note about subcontractor costs. Like I said, only Canadian subcontractor costs can be claimed. Subcontractor costs are for people who are performing something on your behalf to help with the SRED, and it's usually related to those direct activities I talked about, you know, testing, analysis, programming, something very specific. Third-party payments are something that we see a lot, especially in tech and life science type SRED claims, is that if you are making a payment to an organization such as a university, et cetera, who is in the field of science that you are in, that you are trying to advance, and they're doing something not necessarily on your behalf, but they're doing a study on that case and you're supporting it financially, you can potentially claim that payment for SR&ED and get the ITC based on that. So this is an example of the SRED cost and how it works. So what we claim for SR&ED basically is salaries and wages, materials, and subcontractor costs. As you'll see in this slide, we put a column for capital costs. Capital costs, machinery, the equipment, all those types of things, they have become ineligible for SR&ED. I know for a lot of people for R&D, that's one of their biggest expenditures, buying lab equipment or setting up dedicated computers, et cetera, that are only R&D based. That is no longer eligible for this program, unfortunately. There are other direct funding programs that in normal times do exist that we can maybe work with you and help fund the project on that basis, but the SRED program doesn't support it. As we talked about with the proxy base, as you can see here with wages, if you're claiming the proxy method, you get 55% of the labor base for wages to claim to cover overhead type costs. So as you can see, and this is really a big thing for especially startup companies or people who use a lot of subcontractors in their business, as a consideration when you're doing R&D and some of the planning that we do, is you can see here $100,000. If that one person makes $100,000 of wages, and you look to the bottom, the rate of the return there, you're going to earn ITCs on that wage base at 66%. You're going to get $65,000 back on that $100,000 of eligible wages for that person, versus only getting back 34%, to $33,000 on that same $100,000 of labor if you treated them as an external contractor. And that's because CRA takes off 20%. They don't allow an ITC based on that. They say, you know, there could be overhead markup rates in the contract base. So they give you 80% of the subcontractor cost. So if you're considering development and you have the option of determining whether to hire someone internally or keep them on subcontractor costs, and they're a dedicated SR&ED employee, that's one of the key things that we would work with you on to say, hey, how best can we maximize your SRED claim, and if it's an option. There are costs putting someone on payroll versus keeping them as a subcontractor to that, and we can run through that to see if that 66% that's getting that makes the difference to your organization. But it's a huge difference. And materials get the they get the $42,000, which is the 42% back. It's kind of the return that you get on your material costs. One thing just to note here, and we can talk about this slide, Andrew, that's fine, but just before we move on, and then I'll kind of wrap up for questions. Other assistance I didn't include in here, things like IRAP or like SUS, like this wage subsidy program that CRA is providing through this COVID support. Government assistance can offset SRED. So it's very, very important to look at the specifics of the granting agency's agreement and bringing that up front to see if that will have an effect on your SRED claim. It can have an effect on a per cost, per item basis, like an individual basis, or it could have it on a per project basis, and everything is treated differently. We have been told by CRA that the SUs, like the labor support that they're providing, will be treated as government assistance for SRED. So tracking time during the period that you're receiving it, the development hours versus the time you're receiving versus not receiving it, will become very important to ensure that when you're capturing it correctly, but also not maybe capturing too much during that time period. So that's some of the planning points that we would do with you. So last slide, Andrew, just to wrap up quickly. This is something, just to wrap up, that of a SRED project within a business project. And some of the planning I think that is really important to go through when you're making a SRED claim is saying, and any grant, so I'm talking specifically about SRED and direct funding, is understanding what your business project is, breaking down the various technologies. So in this case, using feature 1, feature 2, that could be tech related, like your various versions or releases of your software, understanding of when that occurs, and then mapping that specifically to say the experiments or the experimental development within SRED. You can use this the same way like in health sciences, for example. You know, a business project in this case spans a couple quarters, but health sciences, they could span years. And it's very important to understand how that project maps out over years and the various components of it. Using this helps you plan when you apply for both SR and ED, like I said, at the end of a fiscal year, but also helps you understand what projects maybe that you can apply for direct funding as well. At the end of these slides that I think you guys will get in your package is I've included a link to a government website which shows you all the current direct funding sources that you could apply for, as well as all the tax credit programs. So in addition to SRED, there's media tax credits, film tax credits, and all those things to support different initiatives. And then I think it's really important for everyone to be aware of. But it is difficult to navigate and understand how they all interrelate. And so that's what we're here to support you on. So I know that was quick, but I hopefully that's a lot of information. But if there's any questions or anything that I can answer, that would be great.
Well, thank you so much, both to Andrew and Jennifer today for a very informative session and really your guidance and insight into leveraging the SRED tax credits and navigating the program. We do have some questions that have come in. So what I'd like to do is just start off with the Q&A quickly. I want to be respectful of everyone's time. It's almost, we're almost at time at 1:45. So I hope everyone can stay on the line just for a few more minutes as we go through some questions. But certainly the first question is, if I've applied for government assistance programs due to COVID-19, will it impact the amount of SRED tax credits I can receive? And I know you've actually touched upon that in your presentation. Can you maybe reiterate how do people go about looking if they have applied for a funding program already, and to determine how that might impact their tax credit claim?
So potentially it could impact your SRED claim. It depends whether or not at the period that you're receiving, let's talk about the SUS, for example, the wage subsidy, if that's on a per person basis. So if you received funding for engineers, for example, in the month of April, May of this year, and at the same time those engineers were working on SRED eligible projects, that money will directly affect and reduce your SR&ED claim. If you receive money for the SUS in the time period, but those same people did not work on SR&ED, but maybe worked on it in October or November of this year, it will not affect it because it's different hours and different time periods.
Okay, well, that's very helpful. And I think we had a question come in just to say, will the slides be available after this presentation? Yes, we are recording the session and the slides will be sent to you in a package to you right after the session later today. So another question has come in is what consideration, or you've talked about consideration businesses should take into account before they apply for SRED, but is there a checklist on what are all the eligible expenses and how to prepare in advance?
Yes, so the eligible expenses are there, ones that I went through on that,
Yep.
Labor, materials, subcontractor costs, and what we can prepare in advance is when you look at that documentation, any of those things that you might have, whether it's CAD drawings, if you're in that type of industry, whether it's research papers that have been published, timesheets. Tech companies typically have like their epics, their Git commits, maybe their Jira, for example, anything that you might have that you can bring to us, and then bring us, like we said, that business project. And then what we have is conversations with you in conjunction with some other documentation to see where the technology might lie within the project. Okay, and we phase that out with you. We vet through it together.
Okay, okay. We have another question here is, if I receive $10,000 from the government assistance programs, but my project, my total project for a SRED is 15, is it worth my time to apply for SRED?
My answer would be yes, in general. So as you can see from that slide deck that I did, you're still, even though you think there's only 5,000 left, and then there's the ITC on that, you will get that 55% proxy on top of that. So there's additional costs that CRA is giving you. So I find that typically in most situations, it's worth companies' time to make the claim, even though they think they have been largely funded.
Okay. And another question that's come in is, are SRED tax credits restricted to certain industries, and are there specific rules or criteria for, you touched upon healthcare, universities, or what about the digital gaming industry?
Yes, there is. Basically, any company can apply in any sector for the most part, yes. There is some industries that have more different guidelines than others. So the healthcare, for example, CRA has just indicated a guidance paper, and there's some specific intricacies and rules, especially with collaborative agreements, working together, that they have their own set of guidelines to understanding what's eligible. The eligibility in general is still the same, but there's some specific guidelines and that relate, and issues that relate specifically to those industries. For media tax credits, etc., yes, there is a link that we will provide in our website, in our PDF of the slides, that you can see that will go and link those specific rules for those tax credits if you want to apply for them.
Okay, and another question is, when is the best time to apply for SRED? And I think that's a good question. I think on the one slide you did have an indication of a timeline of projects, but given when people's fiscal year ends and begins, what happens if they overlap into a different fiscal year? How does that work?
So you can only apply for SRED after your taxation year end is completed, because it's applied for on an annual basis with your tax return. However, SRED projects don't follow that, and they can go over various fiscal years. So before you start something, or during, is a good time to contact us, or a good time to make sure you think about SRED, because there might be documentation, etc., that you need in order to make a successful application. But it's always after the fact, it's always at the year end when we apply, and you have 18 months after your year end to apply, should you wish to take that long. We don't suggest that, but you do have that long to apply.
Okay, well, that's good to know. And then another question that's come in is, I'm starting a company. Am I potentially eligible as a new company to claim a research period when we are before profit?
Yes. SRED is independent of whether or not you're profitable or not, or have revenues or not. It's specifically technology based. So what we need is an incorporated company with eligible expenditures. So we need to ensure that there's T4 labor, etc. Owners. Sometimes, new companies, startups, they aren't able to take themselves a wage because the revenue isn't there. So that would be a case where I said you might have good science, good technology, but not an eligible cost. So it's really important to make sure that you have the cost that you can claim there. But yes, you could claim potentially. Okay,
and I think we might have some more questions coming in here. Hold on. No, I think that's it. I think we've answered all the questions so far. So with the new changes to the program, you can really leverage the SRED tax credits and other government programs together to get the most money for your company. So that seems to be the message that comes out of it. What you may have, everyone may have different unique situations, and if you're trying to navigate through them, I think BDO can guide you through how to best leverage your application. So remember, our virtual office hours with BDO, where you can book your complimentary one-on-one consultation, is tomorrow between 1 and 4 p.m. So a link will be sent to you afterwards, but you can also visit our website at techalliance.ca and click on the events to register for your personal session. So I just want to thank you again to Jennifer and Andrew, and for all of us joining us today. Jennifer, Andrew, did you have any other remarks before we sign off?
Yeah, thanks for Tech Alliance for the opportunity to collaborate, and thanks for our attendees for taking the time to listen.